Hi, I'm Talia Baroncelli, and you're watching theAnalysis-news. This is part 2 of my discussion with Bob Pollin. In part 1, we were talking about the Green New Deal, whereas in part 2, we'll be focusing on the economy and inflation. If you'd like to help us out, you can go to our website, theanalysis.news, hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen, and make sure you're on our mailing list. That way you always get notified every time we publish new interviews. You can like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify or other podcast streaming services. See you in a bit for part 2. I'm very happy to be joined by Bob Pollin. He is an economist as well as professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's the co-director of the Political Economy Research Institute, also known as PERI. He served as a consultant to the Department of Energy during the first Obama administration and also advised Bernie Sanders, as well as progressive Democrat Pramila Jayapal on issues such as Medicare for All. He co-authored the book Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal with Noam Chomsky. So it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, I had a few questions for you about the economy and about price gouging, because a lot of people are speaking about Kamala Harris's plans to combat price gouging. So people like David Sirota from The Lever have come up with this term greedflation to explain what happened during the pandemic. And he would argue that during the pandemic, a lot of companies were engaging in price gouging in the traditional economic sense of the word, meaning that they were taking advantage of supply chain issues at the time that were caused by the pandemic and increasing prices. There are other ways of understanding price gouging. It could also just generally mean price fixing, increasing prices, or also adding junk fees to prices in order to make a profit. So what would your general assessment be? Would you say that greedflation is a sort of framework to understand what happened during the pandemic, and was price gouging taking place, and is it currently taking place?
The underlying operating principle of capitalism is greed is good. So there's always greed operating. And yeah, it's celebrated. I mean, go back to Adam Smith, 1776, The Wealth of Nations. Don't rely on people's sense of virtue to get anything done. Look at their self-interest. That's greed. Now, so the question is, did capitalists become more greedy during the pandemic? Well, no, of course not. But the conditions, as you said, the lockdown led to a global recession. And then the reopening, there were these supply shortages, and generally also there was a pent-up demand because people weren't spending as much. So that created the opportunity for big markups. So if we look at, the biggest single driver was energy, where, oil prices, gasoline at the pump here in the U.S., went from like $2.50 to $5. That's ended. So it's important to realize that has ended. So the latest inflation figures for the U.S., basically there's no inflation. I mean, negligible inflation. The official consumer price index, 2.9%. And, there's issues of measurement, which I don't have to get into, but the basic point is we're back to where we were pre-COVID. And yes, there was huge markups, huge profits, excessive profits. And yes, there should be more aggressive enforcement. There are, the antitrust laws, if you actually read them, the anti-monopoly laws, the, promoting competition, they're pretty good. They're just never enforced. And, one of the things I give credit for the people in the Biden administration, especially the leader of the Federal Trade Commission, Lena Khan, who was a very progressive person coming out of a progressive background. She has been trying to enforce, and, a lot of people have been denouncing her. for exactly trying to enforce the laws on the books. So that can moderate inflationary pressures. But right now, there are no, there's not zero inflation, but zero inflation would be problematic in different ways. So there really isn't a serious inflationary problem anymore.
Well, Lina Khan's FTC did publish a report in March of this year, essentially corroborating that price gouging did take place after the pandemic. And Kamala Harris has also spoken about price gouging. I mean, some economists were up in arms saying that, her plan doesn't make any sense and that it's an abomination. I mean, if you watch CNBC, for example, you hear all sorts of economists like Mark Zandi from Moody's going on and saying there's no such thing as price gouging in our economy. So they just seem to be really opposed to her potentially supporting Lina Khan. I was wondering what your assessment is of her plans to combat price gouging and whether you think she'll be as supportive of some of those Biden-era policies, which are, in support of enforcing antitrust laws.
Again, I don't know where she's going to land, where Kamala Harris is going to land. I think Biden, brought in a lot of excellent progressive policy makers, Lina Khan being one of them, people on the Council of Economic Advisors, very progressive people. I've known two of the members of the Council of Economic Advisors. I've known them for 30 years in my little world of progressive economists. So there are really good people. I don't know where she's going to end up relative to these people that Biden put in place. And by the way, I was surprised that Biden did what he did. So greedflation, price gouging. I mean, again, these are nice terms for something that we've known about forever, which is when oligopolies, monopolies have excessive power, they'll push prices up as far as they can to make the most money they can. And the pandemic gave the opening post-pandemic gave them the opportunity to be more aggressive with pricing because there were supply shortages and pent-up demand that was coming. So the two things. So, demand is bigger and supply is smaller, and that enabled them to jack up prices. That will not be the case all the time. Like right now, it's not the case. It doesn't mean that the idea that capitalism is driven by greed is a good idea. It's not. But that particular feature is not going to be a persistent source of inflation. If you actually look at inflation over the last 60 years, there's one factor that is the main driver of high inflation, rather than just kind of general, 2-3% inflation, and that's oil prices. So when we talk about a green transition as well, I mean, that is also addressing the idea of, big inflation spikes. If the major factor driving inflation globally, every time when we go from 2-3% to 8% real fast, it's oil prices. It's the number one driver. And if you have an economy that does not depend on oil so much, that factor is going to be diminished over time.
Donald Trump keeps saying that it was the Biden admin that was responsible for inflation and that Kamala Harris would also cause this inflationary trend to reproduce itself. Do you agree with that? I mean, can you pinpoint inflation on any one administration, or is it actually more tied to the Fed?
So, from some early 1990s until right up to the pandemic, we had very negligible inflation. I would argue even for a somewhat higher inflation if the trade-off was better jobs, more employment, higher wages. We can get into that later if you want. But so what happened in the pandemic? We shut down the global economy, and starting with Trump, continuing with Biden, you had this huge government stimulus to inject demand into the economy, to give people money, to give primarily with Trump, to give businesses money, to give his friends money. If we hadn't had those stimulus programs under both Trump and Biden, we wouldn't have had inflation. We would have had deflation. So the prices would have been going down and we'd be in a Great Depression. So, the inflation did occur in part, yes, because the government propped up the economy.
And we should just say how much that was. I mean, the CARES Act involved something like $2 trillion from the Treasury, and was it $2 trillion from the Fed as well?
So we had basically 3 rounds of stimulus, 2 under Trump, March 2020 and December. He had already lost the election. But anyway, so we had this second round. And then we had another one in March 2021, the rescue plan of Biden. And they, the first injection was about 9% or 10% of U.S. GDP. So that was like $2.5 trillion. And then we had another one under Biden, just months later, another $1.5 trillion. So there's another 7% of GDP. So that's government spending. On top of that, you refer to the Fed. What did the Fed do? The Fed was basically pumping $4 trillion into Wall Street. And the way they do it is they just buy up the assets. They buy up stocks, bonds of companies that otherwise would be failing. And so we're talking about a stimulus program or a counter crisis program, in the range of massive 20% of GDP. I mean, totally unprecedented in peacetime. Nothing like it has ever happened. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being hyperbolic. And not just in the U.S., but in Europe as well, other advanced economies. So yes, and having the economy not collapse meant that there was a floor through which inflation prices were able to rise. And yes, there was much higher inflation than had been in the recovery after the pandemic. But to me, that's the better option than deflation. The deflation, we could have had prices going down, and the way prices would have gone down is that we'd be in a complete depression. Nobody would have money to spend on anything.
But I mean, the argument then was that you would put all this money into the economy. You would, give this money to companies so that they could continue to pay their workers. But some workers were still let go. And I think some companies were still engaging in horrible practices such as stock buybacks. I mean, how much of that money was perhaps wasted in a way?
A lot, but not all. And there was a shift between the Trump program and the Biden program. The Trump program was more focused on giving money to corporations without strings. The Biden program was more focused on giving money directly to workers, unemployment insurance, to families through the child tax credit. And, that was a huge success. It briefly actually succeeded in lowering child poverty by 50%. So those were all part of the stimulus programs. And even still, yes, of course, nobody said you're not allowed to engage in stock buybacks. Some of that did happen. And that's, So the question is, how much of it was just propping up companies that didn't need to be propped up, making rich people richer? There was some of that, more so with Trump. On balance, though, in the absence of it, we would have had a depression. That's my firm belief. And we would have had lower prices. But there are, that is a problem, but it is not the worst problem. The worst problem is 25% unemployment. When the lockdown started in March 2020, the unemployment rate was, I think, like 3.4%. In 1 month, it went up to 14.5%. And then thanks to the various stimulus programs, it came right back down, which again, unprecedented that you would have a spike of unemployment, 10 percentage points, and then it would come right down in a matter of months.
Well, in 2022, you wrote an article in The Nation called "The Federal Reserve Attacks American Workers," and you were attacking Chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell. At the time, the interest rates were really high, and I guess he was trying to change those employment numbers. Are you still as disapproving of what he's been doing recently?
Yeah, well, I mean, the basic premise that the way you control inflation is by raising the unemployment rate. That remains the basic premise. I mean, so even today, now we're down at 2.9% official inflation. And, the new jobs report just came out an hour or so ago. So we're at, 4.2% official unemployment, which is historically pretty good. It's not as low as it was just months ago. But the longer term issue is, we in the U.S. have experienced 50 years of wage stagnation. So the average worker's pay, as of the most recent data, after controlling for inflation, is where it was in 1972. On average, the average non-supervisory workers' average pay is exactly where it was 50 years ago. Meanwhile, the average corporate CEO's pay has gone up, depending on how you measure it, 10 to 15 fold. So if you are just roughly speaking, the average worker, let's say, makes $50,000 in 1972 and makes $50,000 now. The average CEO made $1.5 million in 1972. It is making $20 million now. So the Fed does not have any policy to acknowledge, much less do anything about inequality. So the notion that the way we control inflation is by laying off workers and preventing thereby workers from gaining bargaining power. That's what it is. We dress it up with a lot of fancy stuff, but that's basically what it is. It is when we see inflationary pressures rising, we want workers to have less bargaining power. What is the easiest way to have workers lose bargaining power? Lay them off. Tell them you don't have a choice, and take what you can get. Don't bargain for higher wages. So that's the underlying structure, and that's the thing that, that's the deep issue that needs to change. I mean, that if I had to characterize one thing that, reflects everything about neoliberalism, that's it. That we run a capitalist economy on the idea that workers should never have bargaining power.
So some people are rightly worried by certain advisors in Kamala Harris's campaign. Her brother-in-law, Tony West, has joined her campaign, and he used to actually work for the Department of Justice during the Obama administration and was involved in a lot of the foreclosures. So she actually, as Attorney General at the time in 2011, opposed some of the settlements he was trying to bring about. So that is a good thing that she did. There's a lot of reporting on that. But ever since then, he moved on to work for Uber to serve as legal counsel there. And he was involved in litigation, which was trying to designate Uber workers as gig workers, in which they wouldn't really receive proper benefits. And they're currently earning below the minimum wage in California, so they're not earning enough. And Kamala Harris also just announced that she would not adopt Biden's proposed 39.6% capital gains tax on people earning over $1 million US. This was his proposal for 2025, and she's proposed to have a 29% capital gains tax, which is much less. So is this cause for concern for you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know anything about Tony West much, except what you just said. Plus, he's Kamala's brother-in-law. So, he's going to have her ear because he's her brother-in-law. Who else she's listening to? I'm not sure. Again, just to say that if we're dealing with, the reality of the world today and 50 years of neoliberalism, the economic team that Biden put in place is about as progressive as we could envision. And they're people that understand the arguments against neoliberalism. They know the policy alternatives. They've managed to succeed in some places, not entirely. But, when Biden says, I'm the most pro-union president in U.S. history, it's not false. How successful they've been at transitioning to worker power increasing, they've had some success. It would be great if if Harris is able to commit to that and continue it. And, I don't know. I don't know. And if the only person she's listening to is her brother-in-law, it's not a good sign. Let's put it that way.
So a lot of the progressive policies that we actually have right now are as a result of mobilizing and organizing from the side of climate activists. So in 2019, the reason why Harris actually said she wanted to ban fracking was because of the Sunrise Movement. And to me, it seems like the climate activists maybe don't have as much leverage at the moment, or perhaps they're just not being listened to. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, okay, so absolutely the case, and that Sunrise Movement is great. In fact, it started at my own campus, UMass Amherst. That said, I don't want to give them all the credit, but I think that, just the general Green New Deal movement, enormously successful in getting the message out that you can address climate change and do it in a way that's good for workers and communities. And that idea filtered into the highest levels of the Biden administration, such that Biden himself adopted it. Certainly not in the way that I would, but it was there. I think that it has kind of lost some of its salience, its luster, and the fact that Harris calculated that she has to backtrack on this issue of the fracking is not a positive development. That said, if she wins, I mean, the movement that really moved politics in a dramatic way in this country and elsewhere can keep doing it. Obviously should. And we know how to succeed and continue to succeed in that way.
Maybe one thing which plays into this is what political scientists term attention fatigue. So people can't really focus on more than a handful of issues at once. And activists are making a concerted effort to push Harris on her foreign policy for her to stop Israel from its ongoing genocide against the Palestinians. But obviously the climate movement does need to double down on its efforts to push Harris in the right direction.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and look, again, if we take climate science seriously, we are facing an existential crisis that either we face it and we do something about it, or we are going to see the kind of growing severity, in all places, especially in low-income countries. And therefore, it's not like there's any choice. So all the people that were focused on climate issues and managed to achieve pretty good successes in terms of, impacting mainstream policy. In Europe, as you know, I mean, the official policy, they don't say Green New Deal, they say the Green Deal. And again, it's not exactly what I would have designed, but it's decent and at least is going in the right direction. Those things need to be, re-energized. And hopefully after November, we will get there.
All right, Bob Pollin, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining theAnalysis.news.
Okay, really nice to talk to you. Thank you.
And thank you for watching theAnalysis.news. If you'd like to help us out, you can go to our website, theanalysis.news, and see you next time.